So, recognizing that this is a public meeting, just want to call the meeting to order and also give an opportunity for the public to know who is here, so we can go around and just kind of brief introductions and a roll call in that same fashion. This is Jeff Tumkett-Exem. I'm the Director for the Mayor's Office of Operations.
My name is Stacey Gardner. I'm the Director of External Affairs for the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications, also known as DeWitt.
I'm Shruti Raju, Senior Counsel at the Law Department.
Brad Reed, I'm a Senior Legislative Counsel at New York City Council.
Rose Martinez, Quantitative Policy Analyst at the New York City Council.
Pauline Toole, Commissioner of New York City Department of Records and Information Services.
Zach Pyle, Counsel for Office of Management and Budget, here for the Budget Director.
Fiona Peach, Senior Policy Advisor at the Mayor's Office of Operations.
Erin Cooler, External Affairs at Operations.
Great, thanks for everyone for getting here. Sorry for the line. We'll go through a couple things today. I think we'll move into kind of just a recap and a progress up to date. And with that, the Commission gave feedback at the second meeting. There was a spreadsheet of all the reports that we compiled, provided to everyone, and feedback was given to that. So in that process, opportunities were given to all members to review all the reports. They were aligned with rubrics to the charter language in terms of what the review should entail, and focused a lot on ensuring that local law and charter sections were correct. Since that meeting, we certainly hope that in reviewing that, everyone here will be able to provide their own particular perspective from your different agencies. But we have since essentially provided QA and circulated a list of over 800 required reports. The commissioners reviewed the reports, they provided guidance. Operations has kind of gathered a bit of that guidance and encapsulated together, and we'll present that in the further slides. And those findings will go today, and then we'll talk about next steps with what those initial findings were.
So you've all seen this before. It's been tweaked a little bit since we last met. One thing to be aware of is that we're kind of saying we will aim to release our findings this winter, given just a slightly extended schedule for the reports review and the advisory boards. We still haven't fully gotten underway yet, so we thought that winter is a realistic goal for that. So we're doing pretty well. We're about middle of the process right now. And that leads us into just kind of a review of what our process is in a little more detail than the timeline shows. So this first stage, the compilation of a master list of reports, was what we did in the very beginning, taking input from the city council's list of reports that they had, Doris, their list of reports, and agency feedback. We built a big preliminary list that you reviewed for the second meeting, and we did that QA, as Jeff mentioned, and recirculated. So thank you all for your review of those big lists. We used it. The next stage for that will be agency review. We will parse the list into each agency cut, send to them the lists that we've looked at, or each of their lists, which we have looked at, and get their feedback and recommendations too.
So the agency's getting a reduced list, or they're getting the full 800?
They'll be getting the list that's pertinent to their agency. So
But pertinent to the agency as reduced by everyone's work here, or pertinent to their agency, these are all your reports?
These are all your reports. Here's what's been flagged by the commission so far. What's your input on this?
Sure.
That's how we envision this to go. But one of the reasons to bring it up at this meeting today is to see if you think that's a good method for next step, or any other feedback.
I was just trying to understand.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of agency time, but you folks would know that better than I would.
So we will send to agencies anything that's listed for their agency. So there weren't many that had a very long list. I mean, I don't want to just throw a random number out there, but it should be like well under 100 per agency. And the final stage is recommendations. So reports is what we're talking about today. Advisory boards we have just started to touch on, but we have made headway there since last meeting, so that's good news. So
Just moving forward with the reports review, I'll give an overview at least on some of the, especially for kind of recap and for the public. Several considerations were made by the commission in terms of the reporting requirements. There were 4 major categories that the commissioner agreed to that were out of the charter language. Usefulness, and I won't bother reading it, but usefulness, redundancy, relevance, and benefit, as well as, and not required by the charter but agreed to by the commission, transparency. And these are considerations that we have agreed to, but now as we've gotten into and started to take a look more at the reports, we'd certainly hope to hone in further and have a better understanding of how these would apply in more practical, in a more practical sense as we make recommendations going forward now that we've had a chance to take a look at these. Some of the considerations that we may want to highlight may be charter mandated, as said here. We may want to add others as we look at these and consider them. And we're interested actually to learn, particularly for each of the commission members, how each of you applied these criteria in your review. So we had to essentially create a more detailed framework and defining each of these different areas. What is really usefulness? What is really redundancy? These are good kind of broad categories, but we'd want to kind of get feedback on how we can tailor that language a bit more so that these reviews, one, kind of follow a level of consistency as we move forward in the future.
So that being said, that's obviously the charter language is kind of asking us to take a qualitative lens to these reports, but we needed to quantify it in some way, so that's why we asked commission members to review for each of the pieces mentioned in the charter, plus some other considerations that we thought were important. So what we did was we just tallied responses. Any response listed as a yes meant that yes, we are pretty sure that's consistent with what the charter's asking for and the other criteria. No's and maybes, we thought, okay, that's a flag for the report for further review. So you'll see here the counts are not necessarily that useful. We definitely thought that a lot of them we didn't have enough information to make a determination on, so we'll be looking at those further in depth. But otherwise, uniqueness and relevance were the biggest concerns. So this is just a brief overview showing that we did consolidate responses and kind of take a look at where we should be looking more closely.
So I just have a question.
Sure.
If any one commission member had said, yes, it's relevant, or yes, there's enough information, or any of the criteria, does that mean our thinking is that going forward there's no need to consider it for further review or waiver, or is it that, what does that signify?
It just signifies that the commission doesn't think it needs extra special attention from our level. The agency itself will have a chance to look at that and bring it to our attention.
Okay.
As a commission, we're going to be looking at the smaller group because we think that agencies are valuable players here, and we definitely want their feedback in terms of what they're recommending for possible waivers in part or whole.
Okay.
And the no's and maybes columns, those are those the number of reports for which at least one person marks no or maybe, as the case may be, as opposed to,
Yes.
so if a report had 2 no's and 2 maybes, that would show up as 1 no, 1 maybe?
No, the counts, they're individual counts. So if all 4 people reviewing a particular report mark no, that's 4 for a particular report.
Okay.
So they don't sum to number of reports. There's definitely overlap there. It was just a quick way of us to gauge for this exercise, which I said is trying to turn something qualitative into a quantitative. Not always the easiest. Great. So findings. There were some things we were able to tell from this exercise. As I said before, we narrowed down to about 232 reports that were flagged by at least one person for a maybe or a no. So we're saying we would like to do further review of those. As you saw earlier, uniqueness and relevance, top concerns, and we also took a look at the agencies which had the most flagged reports. So we know that these are going to be big players in our next stage of the game, but we will also incorporate the other agencies' feedback. But just for our knowledge, DEP, Health, HPD, DOT, DOE, Sanitation, and NYPD were the agencies that had the most flagged ones. And further review, what does that include? Agency feedback on all reports and information gathering, which is a rather broad term. We would like to take time to go in depth on some of these that we weren't able to get accurate charter or local law information for, or maybe we weren't able to get a copy of the latest version of the report. But at this next stage, that's where we're going to do this. So that's our short list.
And that would seem like something that agencies can provide, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I guess when I say we as a commission, I mean operations is the gatherer of information from agencies and other sources. And this is just kind of showing again what our top concerns were. So that's what we did in terms of consolidating responses.
So now we want to move forward a little bit on discussion to hone in a bit. As Fiona said, there are several examples that were flagged by this commission on kind of any number of the relevance or uniqueness or redundancy. And here are at least 3 examples up front where there was kind of rationale for why there was a either relevance or duplicativeness or usefulness kind of category. We have DOT and their interagency road safety plan. The material clearly overlapped with a lot of focus on the Vision Zero report that is also being run, and that's produced annually. So the DOT report here is required every 5 years. If the Vision Zero is reporting everything annually, do you really need this report to do that same thing? The interagency road safety plan report is not highly visible as well, and with the Vision Zero being much more kind of a I don't know, publicly accessible kind of report, may also serve that purpose as well. DSNY, in terms of their borough snow plans, flagged for duplicativeness and whether or not it's useful because it's so duplicative. Much of the material in these plans are actually covered in the DSNY annual report. The material in the borough snow plans is procedural, but does not appear to need updating on an ongoing basis because a lot of those plans remain pretty consistent. And then finally, the example of the NYPD Firearms Discharge report, which sounds very relevant, but at the same time, it is something that has been superseded. The NYPD actually now publishes an annual use of force report, which includes all the information previously reported out in the firearm discharge report. So certainly this report kind of has other, the NYPD use of force report includes a lot more other information, but includes this as well. And so this is certainly a candidate that someone might talk about waiving just because it is already included so prominently in a different report. So those are just 3 examples that were highlighted by operations based on the findings of the commission, but we did want to take the opportunity and kind of ask the question here at this forum, what other patterns did you see in your review? And then what stood out to you, and also what do you hope to learn if we wanted to kind of direct the agencies as they review too a bit more from that. We can certainly, from an operations standpoint, kind of rehone what we've already done at a broad level, but we're about to kind of move forward to sending out the reports to the agencies, give them guidance, and also give them some of the commission finding. Great to hear from people here things that we think that they should consider as we send that out, and other findings that you saw as you reviewed it. Anyone?
Well, I'll just ask a question.
Yeah.
In terms of the notes column that we had incorporated into the spreadsheet, I wonder how that figures into some of the analysis. Because, I mean, for myself, one thing that I often asked was, what might this information, or who is using this information, or what, you know, if, an example, you know, if I make up a report, there's a report from 1995 or 2000 or something like that, and it's been annual. I may not know very much about it because I'm not a member of that agency, but it is being reported on annually. Has there been a benefit that we're aware of to that data coming out every year? Does it change every year? Things like that. So I think it would be helpful to have the agencies, especially with some of the older reports, give us a sense of that.
I completely agree. I think the answer to your question is that your notes that you made on each of those reports are going to be instrumental in the communications that we send to agencies and helping lead our questions and their thinking around this exercise.
So, like with the firearms discharge report that was highlighted, one of the salient questions for us would be if the use of force report itself is required by something. And if, you know, if they were doing it voluntarily, and if the agency then, under a future administration, decided not to voluntarily report that, that would probably be an issue for council members. So when an agency is doing a review, I would ask them if they say it's covered by this other thing. That could be the open data law, that could be some other report they do, or it could be something else. I would really like to know if they could flag if they believe they are legally required to report this anyway, or if they're voluntarily reporting this anyway.
It'd be helpful to know what they think, that, I mean, they could give us a citation.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's helpful.
That's
To,
really-
That's a good idea,
a
yeah.
legal provision that requires it, because it also could be a matter of agency practice over decades, you know. It's easier to know exactly
Yeah.
what is requiring it if they give us a cite.
I'm not sure how to solicit this, but I think it would be, I'm a little concerned that when we get responses from agencies, sometimes it might be, oh, this other report, it's duplicative of this other report, period. I think it would be helpful to get an explanation of just where, you know, everything that's laid out in this report is in this other report. Because we wouldn't want a situation where we are under the impression that two reports are very, very similar, and then it turns out that there's, you know, that there's something of great value in the first report.
That's a good suggestion. I'm thinking maybe that is a very big ask for some
Sure,
agencies.
sure. Yeah, I don't know the best way to go about it. I'm thinking, you know, I'm afraid that we're going to get like a check, like a yes,
You
no,
want
it's
to-
duplicative or it's not duplicative, and
Yeah.
that to me is not.
What about copies of the reports? Or, you know, a single copy of two reports that illustrates the duplicate, I don't know.
Yeah, that might
Okay.
be.
Well, I also would just.
I don't know if that's a big ask, though. I don't want to burden the agencies either. At the same time, I strongly believe that this exercise is going to require significant agency feedback in order, and at this stage and going forward, in order for us to have the knowledge to make our decisions.
I think that's right. And getting a copy of the reports themselves, that might be the fix, because then at least they can produce it for us. And then we can work with them to identify overlap or.
Well, just on the duplicative point, I did spend a chunk of time looking at the Department of Transportation's reports, and several of them are just, on the face of it, duplicative, like the Accessible Pedestrian Signals Program that's listed a couple of times, the Bridge and Tunnels Condition Report, the Bike Share Financial Report, and the Bike Share Usage Data. You think they could be combined into one report as opposed to be two separate reports, and they have a really great report on bike share utility, but it's not any of these specific things that were named. And so, I mean, when the questions are sent to the agency, one question might be, how did you take these legislative mandates and deliver on them, even if they didn't issue separate reports, if they condensed like those bike share ones into one,
Mhm.
would we consider them to have done what they were supposed to do, even though they didn't issue 3 separate things? I guess would be, I would think yes, but I would then, that would lead us to some condensing down the line.
That's definitely a thought that I had while reviewing too. These could be combined, but if they're required in separate sections to do this,
I-
yes, it's within our.
I've certainly seen reports combined, whether I agreed with it or not. But that was how it was received. But there could be a case, and it's a big city with a lot of reports. There could be an agency that have reports that are due close to each other in time, but not close enough where it's practical to combine them. And if they wanted to flag that for us, even if we are not necessarily, because our power is to waive, but whatever report ends up being issued, that could be highlighted, and obviously then if there could be a request made, can you combine these or look into combining these? Even though it's not our straight power, it's certainly, in looking at it, if something useful is found or potentially useful.
Or maybe even the agency would want them to be separate for whatever reason. Maybe there's some sort of resource issue where they need different teams working on different reports at different times of the year. So that rationale as to whether to combine them or not would be helpful too.
That's a great point. Cool.
I'm thinking about when we send the list to the agencies, the list of that agency's report. As I understood, we were thinking maybe we would indicate which ones we've flagged. I'm not sure about. I'm just afraid that might cause alarm bells to go off. Just because we've marked off we could use some more information doesn't mean that we're skeptical of the report. It doesn't mean that and I'm afraid that it might not come across that way.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the utility of flagging the ones that we looked at first. I think that, I'm not sure what that does for the agency, except perhaps narrow their focus and maybe pull them off some of the other reports that, if there are 5 ACS reports and only 1 was flagged, might they consider that they're only really meant to focus on that one and not give us feedback on the others?
I think we can, sorry. I
was just going to add, one of the things from a utility, because a question I did have is just kind of a bit more feedback on whether or not the criteria, even in the charter, because it is broad language, was appropriate, and whether or not we needed to provide more specific guidance on what usefulness was, what duplicate, because that, to your point, like, we could use that as a finding, saying this is the chart, the commission's review using this rubric and this understanding of what these different criteria are. Do you feel differently? One, if we highlight those, it could also give them an opportunity to give us feedback on the criteria. So what is usefulness to them? What is kind of redundant to them, or what is relevant to them, versus how we saw it and how we saw it in these reports. But not saying that that's one thing I thought of certainly as I started to take a look at this.
Sure, it sounds like that means maybe more of a questionnaire than simply sending the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Which I think is helpful to guide them to provide more fulsome responses.
Exactly, and we know that that's what the commission did the last time this exercise went around, and we see no need to change that procedure, so that'll help us.
Just because we were talking briefly about the categories and sort of defining what they mean. The way I understood transparency as defined in the documents we've gotten, it's sort of 2 things, right? It's how available is the information if someone wants to go see it, and then to what extent does the report, assuming one sees it, serve the function of transparency in government? And those are 2 different questions, and you could have a report that maybe is posted very, very widely but doesn't serve the interest in transparency, or vice versa, that maybe the city could do a better job of publicizing a report, but the report, if read, really does serve that interest. So, it seems to me that they're 2 different questions, and they might both be good questions, but I think they should probably be separated.
I'm just keeping track of all of your comments so that we have your feedback going into the next stage of this.
I had a question about like when it was marked missing, what did that mean? It was highlighted yellow when in our review?
And if it was highlighted yellow in the first column, it meant some piece of information was missing and we couldn't easily fill it in.
Okay.
Before we wanted to circulate it to the rest of the commission, because there were enough of those where we thought, like, if we wait till we get absolutely every piece, this is going to take too long, like, just an unreasonable amount of time.
So that when I sort of did like a little pivot table to see which of the agencies had most of the missing, HPD, like about half of 44% of them was missing. So that could be a problem.
I think that's useful and probably why HPD was one of those 7 agencies,
Yeah.
because anything that was missing was automatically flagged.
Okay.
So, thank you, that's a good trend to spot.
One thing that I can suggest from DeWitt's point of view is that during the open data process, when we're getting compliance worksheets, we're working with open data coordinators, such as Brad, who's very familiar with the process. Those folks aren't necessarily the records access officers, but they very likely have good knowledge of the kinds of information that are reported out. So I would recommend getting those folks involved in this round of feedback from the agencies. Maybe they can corral people, even if they're not the person.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I'm the open data coordinator for the mayor's offices, even though each of
There you
our
go.
offices have an individual coordinator. So
You coordinate the
I
coordinators.
coordinate some coordinators. But yeah, they're good people to know. So great, we can put that on all of our agency communications, and we'll reach out to do it in the open data team to get the list for each of the agencies.
That'd be great. That's a good idea.
Any other comments, at least in this round?
I would also
Questions?
just say,
Yeah.
in line with that, if you copy GCs, there will be someone at each agency who can tell you what local law required a report, and if none did, that's great to know that we don't have to worry about it. Or we know that it should not be taking the place of a waived report.
Anything else?
I just want to say thank
Yeah.
you to Mo and Doris and all the folks who worked on this list, because we obviously have a lot of comments and questions, and I don't want you to take that as a criticism. It was a big thing to take on, you know, and so thank you for that.
Absolutely.
I can second that. So.
Well, we hope we can use this as like a database of city reports going forward, and just add to it every year.
Or subtract.
Or subtract.
Or subtract.
Yeah.
The whole point of this.
We do our best to
initiative.
add, but I mean, it's
Be mindful of what's going on in the council so it can be accurate every year.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay.
Or you
Reframing
can
that.
add chapters to annual reports as opposed to whole reports, so then the agencies had fewer things they had to do.
I don't do every bill.
Okay, so I think with that, and thank you very much for that discussion. It'll certainly guide kind of how we kind of position the next solicitation of feedback. We'll walk through a couple of next steps. We are collecting this feedback. We'll put it all together. One, you'll certainly get notice of it, but also we'll construct it within to the ask. We'll circulate the agency-specific reports to the relevant agencies along with this feedback and some guidance. We can share the guidance with the commission certainly before it goes out to the agencies. And then we're going to try and finalize a complete list of advisory boards and similar bodies in this next round, because that's been a different effort than just kind of taking a look at the public report requirements. And the next meeting for the board is October 24th. Any questions on those? Anything to add or think that needs to be done beforehand as well?
I guess I would ask, in terms of the advisory boards process, are we planning to do it in the same order, or would we consider maybe going to agencies before we provide our feedback, or our initial feedback.
We can definitely take that as a recommendation. Rather than going through a commission review of each of these, we could just
Oh, and
maybe-
not to suggest that we wouldn't, it's more that maybe we would be doing that review
Following our
with,
operations.
with a little more information from the agencies under our belts.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Mhm.
Do we know about how large, even though if we don't know exactly how large, the advisory board list will be, like as an estimate?
I think it's about 200,
Okay.
so it is significantly smaller than the reports,
More
but
manageable,
it's still,
yeah.
still a sizable list.
We got a list yesterday, so we haven't had a chance to look through it thoroughly for how accurate that 200 is, but it's more than we've had before that point. So I feel better in terms of progress on advisory boards now.
And I think we can double check, but the law department had provided a preliminary list up to 2012 or so that hopefully will be included in there.
Yeah, I think we can make sure that we crosswalk that list with what we've
Yeah.
received from appointments and just make sure that it's all in line. I guess similar to the crosswalking we did with the reports list.
Awesome.
Great. Well, hearing nothing else, I'll call the meeting to adjournment. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.